Bloke Goes Camping, Part 3. So, I've done my daily trot down to the coastline, camera in hand, and managed to get a few lucky shots, the best of which is a starling serenading a sheep. The starling is going for it, and the sheep, slightly nonplussed, has a kind of give me a break look in its face. I spotted that otter again too, fishing just out of a clear shot, too far in the distance to get in decent, but it's still nice to see. The best view I ever had of an otter was down in Balcarry Bay in Dumfries. My boss at the time was also a keen nature lover, and as we trekked along the cliff after a hearty dinner, we spotted a dog otter lying on its back, scoffing a mackerel. We both froze and watched, only a few feet above it on an overhang. Anyway, back to that posh lunch at the port. I swapped my dark and dingy table inside for a sunny one outside, right beside the road, so I could people watch and munch at the same time. Sorted. The sun was belting down on my pint of lager, and all was good until the plate arrived. Spilling over with scallops, mussels, langoustines and half a lobster, all covered in garlic butter. It was an actual mountain of protein. Amazing, but just too much for one, I'd say. Come on, that would feed an army. Anyway, the flies must have telepathic powers, Nelly, because they suddenly appear en masse to help out. Marauding my mussels, latching on my langoustines and scampering over my scallops. I probably used as much calories defending the plate as I did eating it. Still, I managed to down my delicious lobster before I could get the wee tiny mitts on it, eventually resorting to mermaid tactics. You know, like in the movie Splash, when Daryl Hannah crunches a lobster down in a oneer. That's what I had to do just about. Anyway, hot and full as a whelk, and a little knackered, I waddled back to my tent for a well-deserved siesta in the sun. Passing the island shop, I popped in for a few tinnies as a backup and got talking to a guy on a bike outside. He had his whole life strapped onto the frame in a selection of panniers and bags. He even had a dynamo on the front wheel that powered his various satellite trackers and phones. Amazing. I'd say he was about 70 and he'd already chalked up 50 miles that day. He was off to do the rest of the islands over the next 24 days. Good for him. He did tell me a midge story though, which probably demonstrates the dangers involved when camping way out west. In Skye, where they have ninja midges with superpowers, he found himself unable to stay in his tent or survive outside without literally being eaten alive. It was 2 a.m. when he started praying for death, and in a panic, he began knocking on random doors. Can you imagine it? Just going up and down the street, battering people's doors, screaming, "Help!" Anyway, after a wee while, an old lady answered one. She took one look at him, pointed at the floor of her hall, and said, "Lie there to the morning sun." The baker got onto his knees in thanks as she turned, pulled her dressing gown down with her, and tramped back upstairs to her bed. He reckons that lady saved his life. "How did they get in your tent?" I asked. He shrugged and then told me that he'd seen something move at the back of his tent, but when he went to pick it up, it turned out to be a living, writhing ball of midges that immediately engulfed his forearm. It was then he'd screamed and bolted for the village. So, it was with some trepidation that I scanned my tent in the gloom of dusk that night. Having mentioned midges once or twice, let's take a closer look at what the wee blighters are all about. Midges are found all over the world and in all areas, from deserts to jungles, and some of the biting midges like sandflies or blackflies can act as vectors of disease. They mainly feed on blood and need water for their larval stages. Some are important pollinators and of course make up a large part of a bird's and other insectivores' food supply. But it's the ones in Scotland that I'm interested in, funnily enough. Here's a wee fascinating fact. The Scottish landscape would not be the way it is now if it wasn't for the midgie. Able to reduce grown men and women to tears, they've kept our land relatively people-free in certain areas. They mate in the summer and, in my experience, appear about, usually late May, early June. They lay eggs on boggy ground, which hatch in 24 hours, and then there are 4 larval stages that feed on muck and the likes in the soil over the rest of the summer. They overwinter until the days lengthen again, and after a short pupal stage, 1 to 2 days, they emerge to do their dirty work on tourists and locals alike. The males are non-biting, only existing to mate and die. It's the females that bite, drink and lay, up to 3 more batches of eggs. We, of course, feel their impact firsthand, but some species feed on other insects too. That midges I'm talking about here. They've been known to attach to dragonflies and drain blood from the veins in their wings. A bit like a clegg, only in miniature, the female mouthparts act as a pair of saws, cutting through our skin. Then they spit in an anticoagulant that stops our blood clotting, and they drink. If undisturbed, which unless you're lying comatose with drink is unlikely, the female will feed for about 3 minutes or so, taking about 2 microlitres of blood. When bitten, we release histamine, which forms an itchy lump. Those with better immune systems actually release more and get more itchy. And yes, some people get bitten much more than others. The lucky ones have high ketone levels in their scent, and they don't get bitten as much. So maybe the Atkins diet is a good idea when camping. Ketones are also high in diabetics and alcoholics. My better half, for example, very rarely gets bitten by midges. But I'll say no more than that. As far as the historic demographic of Western Scotland goes, well, I'll leave that one up to your imagination and deductive powers, Midges like to breed on boggy, peaty ground, which is of course found more in the west, and they don't move more than about 1 kilometre away from their breeding sites. Interestingly, they tend to hatch in batches. The pupa lie on riverbeds, and then, when the conditions are right, they drift up to the surface like a fleet of emerging submarines, which all pop open in unison and release their deadly cargo. To finish my camping diary, I'm going to give you some midgie factoids, mostly gleaned from fellow campers. They're about 2 millimetres long. The most ferocious out of the 37 species found in Scotland is a Highland midge, Colecoides impunctatus. In 1 hour, 40,000 midges could land in your arm. When one midge finds you, they release a pheromone that summons their pals. They prefer low light, and dawn and dusk is when they're most active. Their activity is reduced below 10 degrees. They're attracted to CO2, that is your breath. They're more attracted to dark clothing. They're less active in winds of greater than 6 miles per hour. They're less common above 700 metres. People I've talked to often used Avon Skin So Soft, and although the formulation isn't as good apparently as it used to be, it still works a bit. Pomegranate skins, I've been told, might work. Marmite and campfire smoke. I also remember having a boat in Loch Lomond and finding that being about 500 metres from shore helped too. So I'll finish off with the ultimate midgie advice, okay? Get a bevy, get your ketones up. Sleep in a boat about 500 metres from the shore, maybe in a lochen about 700 metres up, and smother yourself in crushed twiglets. Or get a hotel room. Speaking of which, it was time for me to finish camping, so I gathered my stuff the next morning and got a lift for a couple of friendly people to a bus stop where I waited for a couple of hours in the sunshine. A few people stopped in their cars and kind of said, well, if it wasn't kind of COVID time, I'd give you a lift, son, but you know how it is. I understand. When the bus did come, I donned my mask and on I got. Onto the ferry I went, over the loch, and onto another bus. It was a wee bit nerve-wracking travelling public transport in COVID times, but I've got to say the bus was pretty sparsely populated. There's 4 of us on it, I think. And it was a massive thing, so I seem to have survived that one anyway. And I got back eventually to the shores of Loch Lomond, where my better half picked me up, after me telling her the wrong place altogether to get me. So she wasn't in a very good mood when she did turn up. A few days of freedom in the wild were over, and I would have to content myself to maybe next year. If you have listened, thank you very much. And remember, that book, Old Bloke Goes Running, is still on the go. Ideal for Christmas. Speaking of which, The Nature on the Hoof calendar by Paul Murdoch, whoever he is also available for Christmas. $7.99 signed if you go on neatabooks.com and order one. You can get it on Amazon and all over the world and bookshops and things if you order it as well. But if you get it off my wee website, I make about 10 pence more, which is great. So, well, stay safe, because things are getting bad again. And stay in if you can. And until next time, ciao for now. What do you mean, did I get you a present? Come back. What more could you want?